over to Carrie Drake Saunderson.
Thank you, Heidi, and hello, everyone. Can you hear me? This is your sound check. Thumbs up. Okay, not. I see some familiar faces and some new ones. I'm delighted to be here with you and just having a lot of positive nostalgia from graduate school. Dr. Henriksen, hearing you speak. Now, if you notice, during my presentation, if I see you taking tally marks, maybe you're counting my unorthodox expressions, I don't know, but you'll have some grace. And if I say a lot, then you'll just think she's not lying, she's telling the truth. This must be real. Okay, so, okay. And to answer the questions that were being talked in the chat, or talked about when we were chatting, I'd be happy to discuss anything afterwards. I know there are some exciting curriculums coming for newcomers for that very reason, for those that are illiterate. So stay tuned. ITESOL, teaching. This last year, when you kind of reflect on your life and what's surfaced, I imagine there are a lot of different emotions that have been going through your mind, your heart, your physical health, the reactions. So kind of reflect on that. And I'm going to talk a little bit about a study that was done by the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence. They recently surveyed 5,000 teachers, and they asked these 5,000 teachers over the last year, and this is in 2020 that they did this survey, so this is recent. Over the last year, what are the most frequent emotions that you feel in your life and in your day-to-day? Out of those 5,000 teachers that were surveyed, these were the top answers: anxious, fearful, worried, overwhelmed, sad. Given the pandemic and the teaching stress and the change that it forced so many educators to face, that is not a surprise, right? To see those 5 words, and maybe you can empathize with some of those feelings in your own positions and uncertainty that you faced. Now we might be thinking, well, yeah, that's just because there was a pandemic. That's why, these feelings have surfaced. However, they did this survey just a few years prior, the same survey, to another 5,000 teachers, and the responses are quite similar. Frustrated, overwhelmed, stressed, tired. There was a happy in there, which, interestingly enough, in stress research, there is a correlation between high stress and life satisfaction. So if you are feeling some stress, know that you're probably in a satisfying position and career, and you're doing some good in the world. So the next result that came from that is, so before the pandemic, teachers were already burning out. It's not just the pandemic that's causing burnout. This has been an ongoing problem for a long time. And they talked about how the most important thing for schools now and administration is to recognize that teachers need some emotional intelligence training themselves. So what can we do to set ourselves up to be more stress resilient, to thrive in the face of crises, and therefore help our students? Now, today, if you feel comfortable, I'm happy to make this interactive and have you interact. So if you want to turn on your cameras, you can even unmute yourself to chime in from time to time. Please feel comfortable to do that. I am much more of and I'm sure I'm not alone here, in-person interactive type. The webinar format is foreign and strange to me, kind of like some of those different unorthodox expressions felt strange at first. I feel that way in this new kind of platform sometimes, where I'm just speaking to, it feels like myself. So feel free to chime in when I ask questions and things like that. So today, just as an overview, we're going to talk about that mental side of becoming stress resilient, how you can really put some tools in your own toolkit that hopefully don't add a burden to what you're already doing, but actually can help you to thrive and kind of reframe some of the experiences that you're having. And the hope is when you leave today, you'll have a new understanding of stress and health, and then also acquire several tools to access mental resilience during stressful times and situations. So something to walk away with, that's the goal. Now, just to define our terms, when we talk about stress, what do we mean? Essentially, any time that we're out of balance, we're out of what science calls homeostasis. So whether that's, the systems in our body, mentally, physically, otherwise. So typically when we're under a lot of stress, that's our body's response to show that something is out of balance. And that is quite common. Now, those stressors can be a real threat, like, a bear is chasing you. Where I live in British Columbia, that is actually a new real threat in my life, or, a perceived threat. Maybe, someone has a fear of flying and they're already feeling anxious about the flight months or weeks before they even get on the airplane. That's a perceived threat. So essentially all that is we're out of homeostasis. That stress response is our body's way of saying something is out of balance. And then we have the opportunity to face that challenge and overcome it or not and just learn from that. So essentially stress is anything in the environment that causes the need to adapt. Now, do we as teachers face anything that causes us the need to adapt? Absolutely, every day during the pandemic, absolutely. And I want to hear some of your experiences as well. I have this image from Inside Out, if you remember that Disney movie. In 2020, I think this may be a little bit what was going on inside of many of our minds. And maybe some of that is still carrying over. Maybe some of it has lightened up for you. Essentially, feeling stress is never going away. So being able to learn how to adapt and cope with that is really important. But I would like to know, I've asked some teacher friends that I have, but I would like to hear from you if you feel comfortable being vulnerable, sharing, whether your own experience or someone else's. What is causing you as TESOL teachers or educators, administrators, what's causing you stress right now or has been over this past little bit? Anybody feel comfortable sharing, chiming in?
Hey, Carrie, I'll share.
Thanks.
It's Maria Summers. I'm not going to turn the camera on because I don't have makeup on.
No problem. I only put on makeup for you. Go ahead.
So something that was very hard for me was to help my students emotionally, because I could tell a difference from the previous year, right? I have never had so many students in the past that had mental problems. They had depression and anxiety. So I think my focus actually this past semester even was to help them emotionally and then help them with language proficiency. And that turned out to be a little tricky because I was affected emotionally by everything that was happening. But I feel like it really has helped some students and some were just kind of indifferent, but that was something that we struggled with.
Absolutely. So not only were you trying to put on your own oxygen mask, you're also having this whole class or classes of students who are also struggling and trying to help them. And I think later in the conference, there will be a discussion on lowering the affective filter. And that's exactly what you had to do. You had to recognize that they had emotional needs and before you could even address their academic needs. So that's definitely a stressor that came up. Maybe some people experienced, cut in their class load. Maybe you went from teaching 3 classes to now there was only 1, or your pay was decreased, or all of a sudden you're strictly online and you're trying to do all these hands-on activities that you would normally do face-to-face in the classroom online and just not feeling adequately trained or equipped to do that. And then also just fear about the unknown, the uncertainty of being in the midst of a pandemic and not wanting your loved ones to be sick or yourself, and just trying to navigate all that. So a lot of extra stress. Did anybody else have one that I missed that wanted to chime in?
Carrie, this is Heidi.
Yeah. Hi.
I'll let Sarah talk in a minute. But for me, like as an administrator, as the director at Cell Night, I think one of the things that's been causing me stress is finding balance, because different teachers, different students kind of have different feelings. Some people are feeling much more concerned and much more worried about things. Other people have been feeling less concerned about things. And so finding that balance between all these people that I'm working with as to my level of response and the things that I need to be doing with many different reactions to everything going on.
Absolutely. Yeah. Just trying to balance all those hats and getting back into that homeostasis and so many different needs and roles. Great. Thank you, Heidi. Sarah, your digital hand is up. Something new to look for.
One thing that I feel like over the past year is just kind of had a lot of for other lack of better words, kind of teaching whiplash. I've gone from in-person to hybrid to completely online to hybrid again. Like it has been, there's just been a lot of what I would call whiplash of changing modality so much, and of like sometimes having so very little work, and then like just from semester to semester, just depending on what happened.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. The whiplash. That's a perfect imagery for that. So keep these things in mind as we're discussing today, kind of some of the stressors you've shared, you've faced. Thank you for those that felt comfortable to share. And kind of think about what impact that's had on you this past year, and maybe how you would like it to look going forward. And where our goal is to kind of help get ourselves grounded enough so that then we can help our students, right? That's our ultimate goal. So my next question would be, which lens do you wear? So which of these do you typically subscribe to? So when you feel stressed, do you think stress is enhancing, it's liberating and motivating, or do you think stress is debilitating and bad for me? I can tell you that in my experience, in my education, in the media that I've seen, I subscribe to the stress is debilitating. This is bad. It's going to kill me, right? This is not a good thing. And in the face of maybe that first crisis or my first teaching whiplash or my students' needs, my first thought when I'm experiencing that stress response is, uh-oh, this isn't good. I could die, right? That's kind of like the extreme that I jump to. So I would say that most of us probably subscribe to that. How many of us actually think that, well, maybe stress is enhancing and actually can lead to something better? I don't think that's the natural response. However, that can be a learned response. And we're going to talk today about how to do that and what that might look like and how that could impact us. So I put up this giant word on the screen. Now, if any of you have taught phonics, specifically reading horizons, I'm a little partial to that, obviously. You might know how to decode this 9-syllable word, but does anyone want to take a stab and read the word? Have you seen this word? What is this word?
Psychoneuroimmunology, is that what it is?
Yes, Catherine, I loved your confidence. Thank you. Yes.
Well, I wanted to also make a comment back on the stress. I think that we, like you said, we naturally are like, oh, stress, not feeling so great. But I think that part of, helping us, I don't know, helping us learn how to deal, because there's always stress, like you talked about burnout, I mean, even before pandemic, is this like, oh, this is an opportunity to learn new things. That doesn't mean I don't feel stressed, and it doesn't mean I'm like, oh, that I'm like calm about it. Yes. But really, some of this, an opportunity to learn new things. Not all of it. Yes. Some of it has been over the top, like
absolutely.
But there are parts of it that I think that if you're incapacitated by stress, it doesn't allow you to see some changes or things that are good.
That's a good distinction too, like that if you're incapacitated by it. So let's talk about how can we become less incapacitated by stress. So psychoneuroimmunology, essentially this is a big word to mean the scientific study of mind and body health. So essentially when we're feeling something that impacts us physically, and vice versa. So all of our systems are connected. Okay, that has been established. Now, when I took my very first positive psychology class, I walked into class, his name was Dr. Oh, I just forgot. Okay, I'll tell you in a second. Dr. Daly, Dan Daly, thank you. The first day of class with Dr. Daly, he said, this semester we're going to be talking about the foundations of well-being. But we're going to talk about well-being. We'll be talking about a lot of different strategies and things that you can do. However, if you don't have the foundation in place, all these extra things that we talk about, these deeper ideas aren't really going to have place to plant themselves within your life, within your habits. So he said, it's really important that we address the foundation first. So just to talk about the foundation of well-being, for our brains to be able to think abstractly, critically, they need to actually be able to produce neurons, right? And how do we produce more neurons and have more activity in our cognitive abilities? Well, we go to the foundations. So let me show you, and maybe you could guess. There are 3 foundational pillars to health and well-being that for us and our students, if we're not aligned here, it's going to be quite challenging to develop further, deeper skills around this. And the first one, I'm going to show you my 18-month-old son. He's gonna model the first one.
2, 3.
Okay, so he's moving. I don't know how to stop him. Okay, sorry.
5. Yeah.
Okay, so he is doing some push-ups. I didn't even know he could do that. I guess he's observed mom working out in the home gym, which is sorry, it's not going on. Give me a second.
What?
Just watch that over and over. Okay. So movement is the first one. Now I don't call it exercise on purpose because exercise can be a triggering word for some. I'm talking about brain science here. So in order to help our brains function optimally, we need to move our bodies. Now, that doesn't have to be go to the gym, do push-ups like my son was doing. It can be just alternate routes. My teacher talked about that. Create some small, little, tiny changes, alternate routes to doing this. So, you know, maybe instead of taking the elevator like you normally do, take the stairs, or, you know, if you're parking in a parking lot, park a little further away, just little tiny deposits throughout your day to create some more of this to help set you up for success. If you've read the book Atomic Habits by James Clear, you'll be familiar with what he calls the 2-minute habit. If you haven't, I recommend that book. But basically anything that we're talking about needs to be able to be shrunk down into just a 2-minute habit if we really want it to stick. Sometimes we have these lofty goals and hopes and they're too big for us to actually change and adopt. So a 2-minute habit around movement, just find extra ways to move more, you know, stand up and stretch, stand up during the day instead of just sitting all the time. You can even stand now during my presentation if you want it. That's the first pillar. The second pillar, here's a picture when he was just 3 weeks old, sleep. Okay, so if we're not getting sleep, it's really unlikely that we're going to be able to produce more neurons to be able to think better, clearly, function better. So sleep is the second pillar. Now make a tiny shift. You know, maybe you can't control how long you sleep, but you can control what time you go to bed, or you can control what kind of pillow or what kind of sleep environment you have, or just try to make a tiny shift around that. And then the third one, the final pillar is, what do you think it is? You can probably guess. This is my son, first time trying to have asparagus, had no idea what was wrong, but eating it the wrong way, but he had the right idea with the nutrients there. So the last one is to nourish our body. So get whole foods into your diet, less processed things. Now that could be setting the apple on the counter so that when you walk by, you can grab an apple, or having nuts instead of crackers for a snack, or just kind of more balance in that, because the nutrition, that's how your body produces the nutrients to make the neurons to develop these higher thinking processes. So that's the foundation. Sorry, I did it again. Okay. Sorry, give me 1 second. Let me just jump ahead. Okay, so the third pillar is that nutrition. Now I wanted to establish that as the baseline before we go into talking about reframing our beliefs around stress, just so that you can be thinking, are there any tiny shifts that I can make? Now, this is not meant to be guilt-inducing or overwhelming, just some small changes that would allow me to have my foundation in place that could allow my brain to function optimally. Now let's get into some of our other strategies, what we're here for, learning how to reframe our stress perceptions. This was a news story that I heard several years ago. It happened in Provo, Utah, actually. There was a family camping at Utah Lake, and they had just moved here, I think, from another country. They had 2 young twins and then 2 older children, like a 6 and a 7-year-old boy. In the middle of the night, there was a windstorm and a tree fell on the tent where this family was camping. Now, the 2 younger kids were fine. They were able to pull the twins out of the tent and they were unscathed. The older child, one of them they were pinned under the tree, and one of them ended up with a broken leg. They did go to the hospital later. Now I'd ask you, is this good luck or bad luck? This experience that happened. Anybody feel like chiming in? Do you think it's good luck or bad luck? If you think it's good luck, raise your hand.
Good luck because they didn't die.
Hey, okay. They didn't die. So it's good luck because of that. Okay. Any other reason it might be good luck? Oh, I see some. Sorry, I'm really bad at checking the chat. So if anybody wants to shout at me what's in the chat, that would be great too. Okay. Both. Somebody said both. Okay. Good. Anybody think it was bad luck? And why?
Well, it was bad luck that the tree fell on him.
Yeah, like out of all the places the tree could have fell, did it have to fall on them? You know, like it fell right on them. So the idea is we could really sit here and come up with evidence to support either opinion, right? So it's bad luck because out of all the places it happened to fall on them. The little boy broke his arm or leg, I can't remember what it was. That's bad luck. It's good luck because the babies weren't hurt and only, you know, it's just injuries that could be healed from. They didn't die. So essentially it's a trick question. And Carolee said it's both. It's a trick question because it all depends on the story that we tell about it. And now most of the things that happen in our lives are based on our perceptions. Now we think that we live in this world, something happens and it causes this. This happens and it causes this, but really it's what our explanatory style is, or how we're explaining that event is how we experience it. Let me share one more little story. This is a picture of me in my younger, well-rested days before I had children and didn't sleep anymore. My nieces, I was out visiting them. These are my two nieces when they were younger. We went to a restaurant. I would have forgotten this story completely, except for it really demonstrates how our brains are wired, whether we're 5 or 105. My nieces were coloring with the free crayons that they give you at the restaurant. And the younger one, Avery, was pressing really hard like a preschooler would, and the crayon snapped in two. Now, her instant reaction, you can probably guess, she broke down into tears, was crying, my crayon broke. Right? She really was upset about this. My older niece, Callie, she jumped in as the social support and she said, Avery, look, now instead of one crayon, you have two. Isn't that wonderful? So she told Avery a different story, right? She helped Avery see a different perspective, and it worked. She, looked at her two crayons and went, oh, okay. And like, she was no longer bothered by it anymore. Now, the reality is the situation didn't change. The crayon still broke. And a broken crayon is neither good nor bad necessarily, but the belief around it is what causes that kind of emotional reaction. So keep that in mind as we're talking, you're thinking about your own explanatory style. When, COVID hit, or when stressful things hit in your life, what is the story that you're telling yourself about that? And we're going to talk more a little later about how to reframe those beliefs. But essentially, explanatory style, this is Martin Seligman is the father of positive psychology. He talks about the 3 Ps of explanatory style. So when something happens, usually we attach it to, we have different styles. So we could be a pessimistic explanatory style. We could be an optimistic explanatory style. That doesn't mean that we are a pessimist or we are an optimist. It's just a way of explaining it. So it's not a hard, fast characteristic necessarily. It's the way we view things. So a pessimistic style. So if we're looking at the 3 Ps, which are personal, pervasive, and permanent, a pessimistic style would be, this is my fault, or I'm not good enough to do this. I can't do this. That's how it would be personalized when the situation happened. Pervasiveness for pessimists would be, oh, this is bad, and now my whole life is also bad. Like we kind of like carry it over into every area of life. And then the third part would be, and this is how it's going to always be. It's going to last that way forever. An optimistic explanatory style says, okay, this isn't really about me. This is just a situation that happened. It's more neutral. And it's not everything in my life. I'm not a failure in every area. I still have this going well for me, or my relationships, whatever it is. And then the last would be, this is impermanent. It won't last forever. So keep that in mind. I want to talk about, in the in the description for this session, I talked about exciting research. You know that you use those two terms together. You know you're an educator when you use those two terms together. So here's the exciting research that I came across in my positive psychology program about the power of perception. So keep this in mind, and then we're going to talk about how to reframe our own perceptions. The first one is one of my favorites. It's a study by Richard Wiseman called the Luck Study. They had participants come in and evaluate themselves. They said, do you consider yourself to be a lucky person, or do you consider yourself to be an unlucky person? And then after that, they gave them a task. And the task was they were supposed to look through this newspaper and count the number of pictures, I think it was. About 2 pages in of this newspaper, there was a big picture and it said, if you see this, stop counting right now. There are 37 pictures, or it gave them the answer. And it said, and tell the research assistant that you saw this picture and you can have $250. So those that saw that stopped, counting, went to the research assistant, and they got $250. The interesting correlation was the people that identified themselves as lucky, by and large, saw that ad and stopped counting and got the money. The people that had labeled themselves as unlucky, it was like they didn't even see it. They had a blind eye to the ad. They just were doing the task. Okay, there's 1, there's 2. They didn't even look at the picture. Like it was like they couldn't even see it. So pretty fascinating about just your own perception of, am I lucky or unlucky? Now apply that to stress resilient. Do I believe that stress is debilitating? Do I believe that it's enhancing? And what evidence am I finding in my life to support that? The next study is by Aaliyah Crum. I believe she's at Stanford. I might have to double check that, or Harvard, one of the 2 big ones. She is a researcher that looks at health and well-being, and they did a study of hotel cleaning staff. They looked at 84 female cleaning attendants at across 7 different hotels. And basically they, for the treatment group, they told them, they sat them down, they gave them a presentation and showed them all the ways that their job was actually helping them to meet the daily recommendations for steps and exercise and all these benefits that were happening just by doing their job. The control group, obviously they didn't say anything to, they just let them continue working like normal. Now, over a month period, nothing changed with these hotel attendants. They continue their job like normal. Only thing they did was just measure their stats before and after, their blood sugar levels, their BMI, that kind of thing. After a month, the treatment group, who had just been made aware of how their jobs are actually helping them or enhancing their lives, saw a decrease in weight, blood pressure, body fat, waist to hip ratio, BMI, etc. Just by being told and now thinking. Their perception was the only thing that changed about their job. Pretty fascinating. This is part of a TED Talk by Kelly McGonigal. If you've heard of her, she's another health psychologist. She is at Stanford. She has a TED Talk called How to Make Stress Your Friend. We're going to watch a little clip of it. I recommend you go and watch the whole thing sometime. She also has a great book called The Upside of Stress, if you're interested in that. But she's going to talk about how her perception changed about stress when her whole message the whole time was stress is bad, it's evil, we should be avoiding it, it's bad for your health, it can kill you. So let's listen to her experience.
My confession is this: I am a health psychologist, and my mission is to help people be happier and healthier. But I fear that something I've been teaching for the last 10 years is doing more harm than good. And it has to do with stress. For years, I've been telling people stress makes you sick. It increases the risk of everything from the common cold to cardiovascular disease. Basically, I've turned stress into the enemy. But I've changed my mind about stress. And today, I want to change yours. Let me start with the study that made me rethink my whole approach to stress. This study tracked 30,000 adults in the United States for 8 years. And they started by asking people, how much stress have you experienced in the last year? They also asked, do you believe that stress is harmful for your health? And then they used public death records to find out who died. Okay. some bad news first. People who experienced a lot of stress in the previous year had a 43% increased risk of dying. But that was only true for the people who also believed that stress is harmful for your health. People who experienced a lot of stress but did not view stress as harmful were no more likely to die. In fact, they had the lowest risk of dying of anyone in the study, including people who had relatively little stress. Now, the researchers estimated that over the 8 years they were tracking deaths, 182,000 Americans died prematurely, not from stress, but from the belief that stress is bad for you. That is over 20,000 deaths a year. Now, if that estimate is correct, that would make believing stress is bad for you the 15th largest cause of death in the United States last year, killing more people than skin cancer, HIV, AIDS, and homicide. You can see why this study freaked me out. Here I've been spending so much energy telling people stress is bad for your health. So this study got me wondering, can changing how you think about stress make you healthier? And here the science says yes. When you change your mind about stress, you can change your body's response to stress.
Okay, that when I first heard that research, that stood out to me so much. I thought, wow, are you serious? This can't be real, that it was just a perception on stress that actually impacted their mortality rate. But that's what the research is showing, that this health psychologist changed her complete approach to how to teach people about stress. So essentially, just as a recap, they asked 30,000 people, how much stress have you had in the last year? And do you believe stress is bad for you? Remember that question at the beginning, which lens do we participate in? I know that I definitely was yes, it's bad for you. I should avoid this at all costs. And the bad news was that, those that thought that had a lot of stress also had a 43% increase in death. But, that was those that believed that stress is debilitating. And the good news, as she mentioned, was, if you also had a lot of stress, but you believed that stress was actually launching you into something better, a growing situation, you were no more likely to die. And in fact, they had the lowest chance of death of anyone in the study. That was pretty fascinating to me. I don't know if anybody else felt that way. So essentially my question would be then, and what Dr. McGonigal presented, can changing our perception about stress then improve our health responses? And now I wish I could go back and kind of redo some of those really stressful times in my life, like in graduate school, where I was under so much stress that I ended up with shingles my first semester of graduate school, or, now I'm asking myself, what was the story I was telling myself? What was my perception on that? And how did I feed into it to make it even more? So what the science is showing is that if you change your mind about stress, you can change the response, your body's physical response to it. Now, how do we do that? Well, let's talk about how to get better at stress. Like we mentioned at the beginning, it's not going away. And definitely we know that sitting in that stressful situation for a long time can have negative impacts on our health. It can be impactful. But are there strategies or are there things that we can do that could lighten that impact and actually turn it to something for our good? Let's talk quickly about the two types of stress. This is a picture of these two ladies on a roller coaster. One looks like this is the most scary, frightening experience of her life, and the other is looking like she's enjoying it. Sorry, we have a question. Hold on, Kostia. Let me see. Carrie, do these studies take the amount of stress into consideration? What if a person has too much stress? It seems like a good amount of stress is beneficial, but too much might be harmful regardless of your perception. Absolutely, Kostia. And she kind of talked about that. It's not healthy for you to sit in that stressful state for too long, and prolonged stress can have a heavy impact on it. What the research is showing is basically about what can we do physically or cognitively to help reduce that, because it isn't healthy to be in that high state for long. It's meant to be in short stints to launch you to something better, but if you sit there for a long time, it can be negative. Okay, going back to distress and eustress. So this distress obviously is, but this is terrible. This is bad. This is frightening. This is not good for me. And then eustress is kind of like, wow, this is definitely heightened exhilaration, but it's actually launching me into something better, a growth opportunity. Oftentimes eustress can be if around job satisfaction, around projects that are somewhat stressful, but you enjoy them and you find satisfaction from them, that can be kind of eustress. So in this case, our perception is crucial. So when it comes to stress, our body is responding to what's going on in our brains. Just like my little niece, story of my niece's with the crayon, her emotions followed the thought that she had about the crayon, right? And when that perception was changed, she was able to have a different feeling around it. Now, in my presentation, I don't want to set this up as in this is so natural and easy. It takes practice, but our brains can learn and they can be wired, which is what's so exciting about neuroscience. I think I have another question. Okay, hold on. Feel free to shout it out too. Let's see. This is interesting, and I don't doubt the lens with which we view stress has an impact, but I wonder if you're suggesting that this is merely a correlative argument, or is it causal? I would argue that there is a correlation, but not causal. Scientific data shows a negative relationship between stress and health. Yes, and so again, like feeling, if you're in stress for too long, that being, you know, with your blood pressure high, or your heart rate beating or going faster, or you're not sleeping well, or you're actually having these physical responses, absolutely, that going on for too long is not good. So again, what the research has shown is that while we can actually kind of change some of that, how can we just reduce it just to have a little bit different perspective on it? So I'm just going to kind of go through this, and if you have more questions along those lines, we can talk about them at the end as well. Absolutely. Just some things to think about. And as I'm sharing today, this is research that I've come across and tried to apply in my own life when I'm faced with certain stressful situations, and just kind of what results I've experienced as a result of that as well. So let's talk a little bit about our brains and this rewiring. So if she's saying, if Dr. McGonigal's saying, we can actually rewire ourselves to see stress as helpful, how do we do that? Let me give you this little example. I found this on NPR. Maybe you remember a few years ago, the Laurel Yanny kind of audio clip, or what do you hear? Do you hear them saying Laurel? Do you hear them saying Yanny? And what happens in our brain? This is similar to that. So I'm going to play two sound clips for you. One is in a noisy room where there's a lot of external noise. I want you to listen and see if you can hear the sentence that is being said. So what's being shared? I'll play it again. Did anyone hear anything in that? Just nod your head if you heard the sentence. If not, you can shake your head. No, I didn't hear anything. It didn't make any sense to me. One teacher that I presented to a month or so ago said, I think they said something about steak, but maybe I'm just hungry. So, okay, now I'm gonna play it. Say that again.
I could barely hear it.
Oh, you could barely hear it? Try again. Can you hear it now? Can you hear something?
That was
Okay.
better.
Okay, let me play now. Let's take out all the background noise and just see what the sentence is.
The juice of lemons makes fine punch.
Okay, so that time, could you hear it?
The juice of lemons makes fine punch.
Now, if I go back to the noisy clip, the first one, see what you hear. Could you hear it that time? You still couldn't? Some are saying no. Can anyone decipher it amongst the noisy clip now? Can you hear it now? Sorta. Candace is raising her hand. Candace, you want to just speak?
I think it's crazy how they can kind of tune our brains into that. And so that like before it's just kind of a lot of noise and maybe a word to distinguishable.
Absolutely. Yeah. The first time I heard that first clip, I can't hear anything. The second time, now I'm primed, right? Why does that work? Like you said, our brains were tuned into it now. I'm primed to know what to listen for. So that concept is what we call neuroplasticity. So our brains can be wired to and rewired in more optimal ways to help us. Dr. Ellis, Albert Ellis, who was a psychologist, a famous psychologist, said emotions don't follow inexorably from external events, but from what you think about those events, and you can actually change what you think. So let's talk a little bit about some ways that we can do that. So we know that, sitting in stress for too long can be negative on us. We've also just learned from Dr. McGonigal that it's our perception about stress that can have an impact there as well. So how can we now use our neuroplasticity to our advantage and rewire these brains? Well, the word stress, if you spell it backwards, what does it spell? Desserts, right? So let's talk about some desserts. These are tools in our toolkit that we can pull out when we're feeling the kind of weighed down by our circumstances or overwhelmed by some debilitating experience, or even just slight ones that come up, in driving or things that happen on a daily basis. So these are our desserts we're going to talk about. We got a banana here for feeding the monkey mind by calming mental chatter. We have ABC pudding. Apparently this is a real thing. Avocado, banana, chocolate pudding, reframing the stress response. And then we have abundance pie. We're going to talk about combating scarcity. And then the cotton candy impermanence, siding with time. So these are just some strategies that I've found helpful as I'm faced with situations, and I can apply them, at a moment's notice now, and it just helps to kind of calm me and put me in a more alert state, able to cope. So the first one, taming the monkey mind. The monkey mind, when a stressful situation happens, what's the first thing that happens in your brain? For me, I start thinking so many thoughts. It's almost spiraling out of control. Like, what if this happens? What about this? And oh no, this isn't good. Kind of what I was talking about before. Oh, this is bad. This could be really negative. I could get sick, or my presentation might not go well. Or there's a lot that just happens naturally. And that's called, the monkey mind, the chatter, chatter, chatter. I'm not going to show you this video today, but if you want to go look it up, it's I think like Huffington Post thing, but how to train your monkey mind. It's really cute. Essentially, when you feel, that's my first cue that my stress response has kicked in. I'm getting tighter muscles, my breathing is shallower, and my monkey mind chatter is going crazy. When I feel that happening, the best way, first line of defense, is to just breathe. So focus on my breath. So taking a big deep breath in through my nose into my stomach, and then exhaling. What that does, the breath calms your mind and gives your mind something to think about, but it also activates what's called your parasympathetic nervous response. And this can really help to then put you in the state that, okay, I'm feeling stressed, this is happening, I'm going to take a big deep breath. Now that puts me in the state that I can actually rationally think. So that's the first one. Oh, sorry, I said I was going to play. There we go. The second one, which we've kind of mentioned already a little bit, and we want to dive in just a little bit deeper, is what's referred to as the ABC model in psychology. And this is also popular in cognitive behavioral therapy. It's been used a lot. This is where we break apart what's happening in our brain, because it happens so instantaneously, and learn to reframe our stress. But before we show that, I'm going to show another part of Kelly McGonigal's talk. There's a little parable that I heard years ago that really kind of embodies this reframing idea. It's called the parable of the Chinese farmer. There was once a Chinese farmer who had a horse. And one day that horse ran away. And all the townspeople said, "Isn't that terrible? I'm so sorry. Now your livelihood is gone. How are you going to earn, be able to plow your fields and earn money?" And the farmer simply said, "I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing." That was his response. Well, a couple of days later, the horse came back, and this time he brought a whole herd of Mustang horses with him. And the townspeople said, wow, isn't that amazing? You are so lucky. You have all these horses now. You're going to be rich. And the farmer simply said, well, I don't know yet if it's good or bad. And then his son was helping to try to train one of these horses, and his son, one of the horses, bucked up and then stepped on his leg and broke his leg. And all the townspeople said, oh, this is terrible. We're so sorry about your son. Now, how are you don't have any help to help in your fields. And the farmer simply said, I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing. And then there was a draft, a military draft that came to town, and all the young men 19 and above were drafted to go serve in war. But because his son had a broken leg, he wasn't able to go, and a lot of the young men were then killed. It's a simple parable, but the principle is oftentimes we're so quick to decide if something is good or bad that's happening to us, but staying more neutral might give us more information and the opportunity to grow from it rather than be stumped by the experience. So let's watch a little bit more from Kelly McGonigal, see if she can answer some of those questions that came up earlier too, about then how do we make stress our friend?
Idea. Now, if you were actually in this study, you'd probably be a little stressed out.
Sorry, she talks about a study, just to give some context, she talks about a study where they purposely induced the stress response. They asked them to give a speech in front of a panel of judges, and then the judges were kind of taunting them and teasing them and making them feel anxious and trying to set them up for failure. So she's talking about if you were in this study, what would be happening in your body.
Heart might be pounding, you might be breathing faster, maybe breaking out into a sweat. And normally we interpret these physical changes as anxiety or signs that we aren't coping very well with the pressure. But what if you viewed them instead as signs that your body was energized, was preparing you to meet this challenge? Now, that is exactly what participants were told in a study conducted at Harvard University. Before they went through the social stress test, they were taught to rethink their stress response as helpful. That pounding heart is preparing you for action. If you're breathing faster, it's no problem. It's getting more oxygen to your brain. And participants who learned to view the stress response as helpful for their performance, well, they were less stressed out, less anxious, more confident. But the most fascinating finding to me was how their physical stress response changed. Now, in a typical stress response, your heart rate goes up and your blood vessels constrict like this. And this is one of the reasons that chronic stress is sometimes associated with cardiovascular disease. It's not really healthy to be in this state all the time. But in the study, when participants viewed their stress response as helpful, their blood vessels stayed relaxed like this. Their heart was still pounding, but this is a much healthier cardiovascular profile. It actually looks a lot like what happens in moments of joy and courage. Over a lifetime of stressful experiences, this one biological change could be the difference between a stress-induced heart attack at age 50 and living well into your 90s. And this is really what the new science of stress reveals, that how you think about stress matters. So my goal as a health psychologist has changed. I no longer want to get rid of your stress. I want to make you better at stress.
Okay, so just as a review, so normally when those responses happen, our blood pressure is raising, our breathing is shallow, our heart's racing, we're shaky, we normally interpret those as we're not coping well. But actually what she showed is, we can reframe that and tell ourselves, this is my body preparing me to face this challenge. That has been one of the most helpful things for me in my own personal stress when I'm faced with stressful situations, my own personal life, is just simply that phrase, this is my body preparing me. Even for this presentation, when I couldn't sleep very well last night and I woke up a little anxious about it and thinking about, I thought to myself, this isn't a bad thing. This is just my body preparing myself for this challenge. So she challenged us just to view those responses, those physical responses, instead of seeing them as negative at first, let's try to see them as there for a purpose to help us. And then of course, to answer the questions about the blood pressure raising, or someone talked about their sister in Italy who's not doing well because of the pandemic and the stressors faced. How can we then rethink those to kind of help take down some of these actual physical responses? She talked about, those that were taught to view their stress in that way, and then they measured their blood vessels, they looked more like a healthy profile and feelings that were associated with joy and courage. So want to lengthen your life, over a lifetime of these stressful experiences, it can have an impact. It can be negative. If we want to really set ourselves up for something better or a longer, more healthy lifetime, this one thing can make a big difference. Back to Dr. Crum, she is from Stanford. There we go. I put it on this slide. So contrary to what we think, so normally we think the body's stress response is set out to kill us. The contrary to what you might think, the body's stress response was not designed to kill us. In fact, the evolutionary goal of the stress response was to help boost the body and mind into enhanced functioning to help us grow and meet the demands we face. People with this lens that stress is helpful show greater work performance and fewer negative health symptoms. Now, of course, we have to use that as a launching pad. We can't stay in that stressful state, but if we use the thought process around it and try to reframe it, it can change how it physically impacts us. Now back to this ABC model I was talking about with my ABC pudding. So ABC in our life and in our experiences, A is the adversity or the activating event. So in the case of my niece, the crayon broke. That was the activating event. Then B is the belief that we have about that event, the story that we're telling about it. This is bad and why. And then C is the consequence. That's usually the emotional response. Again, the A is the activating event. So I might ask myself, okay, what happened? If I'm working through this, if I'm trying to work through this to kind of process what's happening, A would be, I'd ask myself, what actually happened in a neutral way? What was the thing that happened? Just like the tree fell on the tent. That was the activating event. B is belief. So then I ask myself, what is my belief about this situation? So which lens am I looking through? Which explanatory style am I buying into right now? And then why I thought it happened and why I thought that was good or bad, what that means for me. That's the B, the belief. And then C is the consequence. So how do I feel, or what do I feel as a result? And then how is that feeling serving me? So simple example, I remember driving through the parking lot one day and somebody drove really fast right in front of me and cut me off. The activating event in that situation was I was driving and somebody drove in front of me. That was the activating event. My belief about that situation was that person was just being rude or didn't see me, or not even didn't see me. That person was being rude and did it on purpose. And then the consequence, I felt angry or frustrated at that person and maybe wanted to lay on my horn. But then when I really thought about it, is that feeling actually serving me to feel that they're out to get me? And it wasn't really. So the way to get around that is D. You've heard the joke. This is an A-B conversation, so see your way out of it. In this case, it's an ABC experience. So let's D our way out of it. Let's dispute it. So, okay, my belief is that that person driving was just being rude. What evidence do I have to support that? Do I actually know that he didn't see me? Is there another way to look at that? For me, that is my favorite question right there. You might be able to see behind me, I have an ampersand up in my house. The ampersand is my visual cue every day to remind me that there could be an additional perspective to this. Is there another way to look at this? Another question, this reminds me of the Chinese farmer. Is there any feasible way that this could be a good thing down the road? So maybe my course is getting cut, right now seems terrible, or my salary has been reduced. Is there any way that this could be good down the road? Maybe it's going to lead me to launch, turn my side hustle into the business that I've been wanting to start, or go back and get my certificate so that I can teach at a university, or, is there any way that it might turn into something better? And then the last final question, when we're thinking through this way, is there something I can do now to make that happen? This was kind of an example. So just as a review, I gave it a similar example. Do you know your ABCs? So let's just practice with a real life example. Someone zips into the parking space you had your eye on. You're trying to get into that spot. You think blank, fill in the blank. What do you think? that person's rude, that person is like, doesn't care about me or anyone, they're, or do you just think they must really be in a hurry? Maybe they didn't see me. But if your response is you get angry, roll down your window and shout at the other driver, you probably had a belief around that experience that they were being rude and trying to offend you. Now take it back to your own experiences, and maybe we could even tie in one that was mentioned at the beginning. So think of it, let's practice this ABC, kind of breaking it down. Think of an experience that resulted in you feeling stressed. Maybe it was Sarah's teaching whiplash that she talked about, going to an online, now hybrid, now back in person and back and forth. Or something even more simple, like I mentioned, the parking example or anything like that. What was the activating event? So ask yourself that. What was your belief about that event? What was the story you were telling yourself? What was your perception you were taking on? What was the consequence then? What was your emotional reaction from that in that moment? And then if we're going to D, our way out of it, what are some other possible beliefs? What else could be true? Now you may be thinking, in the moment of the stressor, it's highly unlikely I'm going to stop and go, okay, what's the A? What is my B? Usually it's something happens and we react. It just happens like that, and just a flash of the light. So what we want to adapt is practice this in calm moments when we can think, but what we want is what's called real-time resilience. What is something we could do in the moment that would help put us in a better state and to be able to cope with that stress, to reduce that, like the blood vessels that Dr. McGonigal showed, to reduce our pressure and our stress and to lower those levels and get us in a more calm state, just because that's better for our health and our body and our mind. So my first dessert that I shared was about breathing. That's my first line of defense. Just take a big deep breath. That's something I can do in the moment, even when I'm feeling frustrated and that exact or overly overwhelmed or stressed. The second would be, can I apply any of the ABCs? If I can't go through this whole process, the one question that I often use for myself, just as the cue, like that ampersand, is there another way to see this? Is there anything else that might be true? That's kind of my go-to question. Dr. Kelly McGonigal said, the next time your heart is pounding from stress, so maybe the next time you're faced with a whiplash moment in teaching, or there's a student's emotional need that you're not quite sure how to help, and you feel that stress response. So the next time your heart is pounding from stress, remember this talk and think to yourself, this is my body helping me rise to this challenge. And when you view stress in that way, your body believes you and your stress response becomes healthier. So think back to the research. The people that viewed themselves as lucky found the lucky opportunities. Those that saw their job as helping their health outcomes and good for their health actually saw those results. If we see stress as my body's way of letting me know that things are out of balance, I need to adapt, but it's launching me into a learning opportunity, it's helping me become healthier, that's how our body will respond. Okay, so back to my desserts. Remember, we talked about the banana for the monkey mind, so the breath. We talked about ABC, so combating, reframing those stressful situations that we're faced with. Is there another way to look at this? So identifying, what is my belief about this? Is there another way to look at this? The third dessert would be abundance pie, and this is related again to our belief. Often when I get into a stressful situation, I remember the first time I conducted a training for Reading Horizons, they flew me out to Alabama. I hardly slept. I couldn't eat. I was so nervous, and I was stuck in front of a room of, I think it was like 50 to 100 teachers. And I thought, I don't have enough training. I don't have enough sleep. I don't have enough knowledge. I'm not cut out for this. I'm not capable for this. So I slipped into what's called scarcity in that moment. And we often do that. There's not enough of something. So a simple reframe in that moment would be to think, instead of scarcity, how can I go into abundance? So this experience is not pie. It's not a finite, limited amount. There can be plenty of time. There can be, plenty of sleep later. There's plenty of adrenaline to get me through this situation. So just in a way of reframing it, taking myself out of scarcity helps and put myself into a state of abundance. So the banana breath, ABC, reframing our beliefs. combating scarcity by thinking abundantly. There's plenty of time and later I can rest and learn more and so on. Gratitude is actually the fastest way to get you into abundance. So when we're in scarcity, we're thinking about what's missing. If we can think about what's going well, that's going to shift our mind into a state of abundance. And then the last dessert that I want to mention before we wrap up is impermanence. So siding with time. I put cotton candy up here. How long does cotton candy last in your mouth when you put it in? Not long. It dissolves quickly. So that's our cue to remember that whatever you're experiencing, this heightened stress from your teaching, changing overnight to now becoming an online teacher, whatever you're experiencing isn't going to last forever. So reminding myself about that too. Impermanence. I can get through this time. I can do anything for a short season. And my stress response is actually my body's ability to be able to get through that. So remembering impermanence. So as a review, let's review. We just breathe. I usually take a big deep breath in, and then I repeat this phrase in my mind when I'm feeling that stress response. I repeat the phrase in my mind, embrace this day with an enthusiastic welcome, no matter how it looks. I borrowed that from a wise man. So after I breathe, then I can reframe my stress. Is there another way to look at this? So A, B, C, then D, my way to a better stress response. This is my body's way of helping me rise up to this challenge. This isn't bad what's happening, but I do want it to be short-lived. I want to get to a more calm state. Then we have abundance. There is enough. There is enough, fill in the blank. There is enough time. There is enough resources. There is enough. I will get there. So reframing it from scarcity to abundance. And then the last for me is that impermanence. This is temporary. So I want to ask you, so we talked about some stressors that you're facing. This is the therefore what part. So the next time you experience, think of a stressor, what's going to be your little trick, or what is something that's worked for you that you want to continue, that you will do to help activate your parasympathetic response and put you in a more positive state to be able to cope and think of better outcomes. Does anyone feel confident to just shout one out, something that you want to do or you do that helps you to cope and to kind of dial into the idea that this stress can be enhancing instead of debilitating? Maybe there's some in the chat. Let's see.
Carrie, I'll be brave.
Yes, thank you for being brave.
I experience a lot of, I think is commonly referred to as imposter syndrome. I feel like I can't quite do what I'm being asked to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for me, like relying on that abundance principle, relying on that gratitude and thinking about, okay, this is really overwhelming. I don't think that I can do this, but I can do this. These are the things I know I can do, and breaking that down into smaller pieces and focusing on, I have enough. I am enough.
I really like that. It makes me think about, there's a book called The Happiness Advantage by Sean Aker. And he talks about the falling forward principle. So even if you feel like you're not enough, even if it turns into a colossal failure, it can, that is temporary, and you are enough, and you can learn, and you can learn from that, and you can launch you forward. So falling forward, that's great. I see some other comments. So what I'm understanding is that stress itself is not good for us. How we respond to it can be good for us. Yes, exactly. And that person has sharper vision than I do. Time again, this is funny. The comments are funny. Okay. Thank you, Heidi. That was a perfect example. So instead of when you find yourself feeling imposter syndrome or scarce, dipping into that abundance mentality, that there is enough time, there is enough skill, and I can do this. And this is my body's response, helping me to rise up to this challenge and face it head on. Great. Anyone else wanted to share?
Carrie, you allude to Brene Brown's The Story I'm Telling Myself, and I really think that I use that a lot.
Yes.
Just because our interactions cause us a lot of stress, our interpersonal relationships. And so I've seen a lot of her work, and I just really like that, communicating and saying, this is the story I'm telling myself, and sharing that with the partner that I'm having that relationship with at the time.
Absolutely.
And allowing them to respond. And I think that's very helpful. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for drawing that back. That is a Brene Brown principle. So if you're not familiar with her, that's some other audiobooks you can put on in your car when you're driving to your other busy things, right? The really, really helpful to then communicate that as well. Thank you. So the next time you are faced with a stressful situation, I hope that you will remember that stressed backwards spells desserts, and that there are several strategies that are scientifically proven that can help activate our parasympathetic response system, that can put us in a calmer state and actually launch us into thriving and growing and developing into the type of teacher, educator that we want to become. And therefore, you'll also be able to help your students. So just go forward knowing your brain is wired exactly for this. You're not broken. This is functioning the way it should, and you are capable, and you are strong and confident, and you can go forward and do what you are meant to do. So thank you for your time today. I appreciate that.